And Peter Turchin says, okay, that's a really interesting theory, but if you look at the historical data, if you look at the evidence, the problem isn't the bottom, okay? If you look at why societies collapse, it's not because of the people rebelling, it's because there's infighting among the elite. The way we usually understand why societies collapse is we get it from Karl Marx. And basically, what Karl Marx says is eventually your society collapses because the people revolt, okay? So basically, people rebellion. So in other words, Karl Marx believes that society collapses because it is a bottom-up process. Okay? It's a bottom-up process. If you treat workers badly, they will stop working. If you force them to work, they will go on strike. If you force them to work again, they will fight against you. They will rebel, okay? A worker revolution. Okay, that's what Karl Marx argues. And Peter Turchin says, okay, that's a really interesting theory, but if you look at the historical data, if you look at the evidence, the problem isn't the bottom, okay? If you look at why societies collapse, it's not because of the people rebelling, it's because there's infighting among the elite. Okay? So there's civil war among the elite. Does that make sense? That's his theory. If the problem with society isn't that there's too many poor people, the problem is there are too many rich people. That's the real problem. And that's why societies collapse. All right? All right, so let me explain to you this theory slowly, okay? All right, elite overproduction. All right, so in this world, about 1200 BCE, we have something called a permanent hereditary elite, okay? Permanent hereditary elite. Permanent just means they're always there, okay? Hereditary means they pass on their status and their privilege and their wealth to the children. And this is new in human history because before there was an elite, but they were not permanent, meaning they could be changed over time. And they didn't pass their privileges on to their children. Everyone had to earn their privilege and power. Okay? So the elite was constantly shifting in society. But now, in about the year 1200 BCE, you had a permanent hereditary elite. When you have that, you have three advantages. Okay? What the elite gives society are three major advantages. The first major advantage is the idea of organization. Right? Basically, think of the elite as your brain, as society's brain. They can help coordinate resources, okay? And that's good for war. If you're fighting an enemy, you need an elite to lead you into battle, okay? It's also good for public works. Okay, so think of the pyramids in Egypt and the Great Wall of China, right? You need an elite to organize your resources in order to create public works that benefit all of society. So the main thing here would be irrigation, right? Okay? So you need an elite in order to have irrigation. So that's the first major benefit of having a permanent hereditary elite. Second major advantage is because you have better organization, you have more wealth, okay? Society becomes wealthier if you have a permanent elite. People work harder. Okay? And even though there's more inequality, inequality also forces people to work harder. Does that make sense? Okay? And because you have these two things, organization and wealth, you also have scale. And what scale basically means is your population now can move up. Before, in the egalitarian society, when you didn't have a permanent elite, at most society could reach about 10,000 people. But now when you have a permanent elite, you can reach about 1 million people. Okay? So now you can scale up. So these are three major advantages to having an elite, okay? But there's a problem with having an elite. And the problem is they engage in something called rent-seeking behavior. All right? I want you guys to remember this term, rent-seeking behavior, because it's very important for our class. So what does this mean? It means basically, so think of a landlord, right? A landlord doesn't really do anything, but a landlord has land that it can rent to you, the farmer. In exchange, you give me a share of your crops, right? So I don't do anything, but because I have land, I can rent it out to you, right? It turns out the elite mainly make their money through rent-seeking behavior. So let me give you another example of rent-seeking behavior. All of you want to go to university, right? Why do you want to go to university? What's your purpose? Be honest. It's to get the degree, right? Okay? The degree. Okay? And the degree is your ticket to success in society, okay? You believe that when you go to university, you are getting a ticket, the degree, in order to access social mobility, okay? To access wealth in society. In other words, the universities are charging you rent, okay? So the degree is basically rent. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, some of you may say, wait, that's wrong because I'm going to university to learn, right? It's about learning. Well, guess what? When you actually go to university, you're going to discover they don't actually teach you that much, okay? They don't have to teach you that much. And the reason why is you're stuck paying the rent. You need the degree, right? So you don't have to actually teach you anything. You have to come to class anyway. Does that make sense? The same thing for the school, where in order to get to university, you have to go through this high school. So you're here paying tuition, and you're paying rent. Does that make sense? You're not here in the school to learn. You're here in school to get the degree so that you can access university and get that degree, okay? And all this process, all you're doing is paying rent. Right? So if you have a school, you can charge people rent. Just as if you're a landlord, you can charge people rent for renting your room or real estate property, okay? Does that make sense? This is what we call rent-seeking behavior. If you can't pay it off, what happens now? Okay, good, yeah. So the idea is debt slavery, okay? So if you can't pay me back, you become my slave, okay? You promise me that your children will work for me for free, okay? And so debt slavery becomes the natural product of rent-seeking behavior. Does that make sense? Over time, you're always going to have a percentage of your population who go into debt slavery. And this creates a lot of instability in society because obviously they either want to run away or they want to rebel, okay? So one possible thing you can do is the idea of land redistribution, okay? So historically, this is one mechanism you can use to control the growth of the elite. And this is how kings came into power, okay? So most societies have an elite, and then one person from the elite said, listen, this society is not working. Let me redistribute the land and cancel debt in order for our society to keep on going, okay? And this person became the king. So that's one possible solution, okay? What's another possible solution? Okay, so you can also have a civil war, okay? Civil war. Okay? The elite can fight amongst themselves, and whoever wins gets everything, okay? So that's the second possible solution. What's another possible solution? Okay, empire building, right? Does that make sense? Empire building. In other words, let's not fight amongst ourselves. Let's go and conquer new territory. It doesn't make sense. So because you have a permanent hereditary elite, okay, over time, they're going to reach a mass, too many people. When you have too many elite, you have to resolve this issue through 3 ways, okay? The first thing you can do is kill the elite and redistribute the land. That's what a king does. Second thing you can do is have a civil war, okay? And the third thing you can do is create an empire, okay? But these 3 solutions by themselves are also unstable, okay? Because land redistribution is basically a revolution, right? Civil war is war. Empire building is also war. Does that make sense? So no matter how you do these things, you're always going to create instability. And eventually, your empire, your society will collapse. So there's a book called Capital in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty. Thomas Piketty is a French economist. And this is a very famous book that's been recently published. And in the book, he looked at the past 100 years of economic growth. And what he discovered that over time is the financial economy grows faster than the real economy. Capital grows faster than manufacturing. Okay? So if you look at capital, grows at 5%. Real economy grows at 2%. Right? If things stay stable over time, this will happen to all societies. Capital will grow faster than the real economy. What this means is, let's just say you have $1 million, okay? I have $1 million. I have different options to invest my money. I can start a factory, or I can put all my money into real estate or the stock market. Where should I put my money? I can open a factory, right? Or I can put it in the stock market. Where should I put my money? Exactly, do you understand? If you have money today, you do not put your money into the factories. You do not open a new business. You put it in the stock market because you make more money that way. What's the problem with that? Yeah, exactly. It's just a bubble, guys, okay? Why is it a bubble? Because money isn't real. Capital isn't real. It's a fiction. You understand? So in other words, you don't work anymore. You understand? You're just renting now, okay? You're engaging in the rent-seeking behavior. When you have too many people doing that, you have a society where nobody works. Does that make sense? Nobody does any work because all the wealth is being put into rent-seeking behavior. It's being put into speculation. So no one's doing any more work. No one's creating more wealth. And this eventually leads to social collapse at some point. Okay?